What's all this about the Maori people warned them? Let's find out about the Wahine Disaster, which takes us to the capital city of New Zealand in 1968. Let's go. On the fateful morning of April 10, 1968, the little town Wellington ferry Wahine became the epicenter of New Zealand's worst modern maritime disaster. Battling one of the most severe storms in the nation's history, the Wahine succumbed to the relentless forces of nature, resulting in the loss of 53 lives and leaving an indelible mark on the country's maritime history. Not to be confused with a former vessel also named the Wahine. The first Wahine was built in 1913 and its last voyage was in 1951. After service in both World Wars, the Wahine was chartered by the New Zealand government to carry K-Force troops to the Korean War. On the 15th of August, the ship ran aground on Masella Island in the Arafura Sea. Everyone on board was safely evacuated, but the vessel was declared a total loss, a sad end to an illustrious 38-year career. 17 years later, an even worse fate was to befall the second Wahine, which was launched in 1966. The Wahine, a product of the Union Steamship Company of New Zealand, represented at the time the latest advancement in ferry design and construction, continuing a legacy that began in 1875. Serving as a vital link between New Zealand's North and South Islands, the Wahine, unveiled in the 1960s, epitomized modern maritime transportation. It was built at the shipyards of Glasgow, Scotland. The Wahine was launched on July 14, 1965, commencing its journey to New Zealand on June 18, 1966. The ferry commenced operations on August 1 of the same year with its maiden voyage from Wellington to Lyttelton, forming a crucial part of the overnight ferry service alongside its counterpart, the Maori. The Wahine completed 67 voyages between August and December 1966. Typically crewed by 126 members, the Wahine boasted a passenger capacity of 1,050 individuals. Its amenities included a cafeteria, gift shop, smoke room, lounge, to promenades, and open decks, allowing passengers to observe the sea. Additionally, the ferry featured two vehicle decks capable of transporting over 200 cars on each journey, ensuring both comfort and efficiency for its passengers.
If you're enjoying this video, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more content. Also, leave a comment down below about what you would like to watch next, and I will do my best to provide content you guys want to know about. Now back to today's content.
The ill-fated Wahine ferry, destined for tragedy, sank in Wellington, New Zealand on the 10th of April 1968. On its voyage between Lyttelton on the mid-eastern coast of the South Island of New Zealand to Wellington at the bottom of the North Island of New Zealand, leaving an indelible mark on the nation's consciousness. The sinking of the Lyttelton-Wellington ferry Wahine on the 10th of April 1968 was New Zealand's worst modern maritime disaster. On that tragic day, 51 lives were lost, with an additional victim succumbing to the disaster several weeks later, highlighting how a tragedy like this can have impact decades later. A 53rd individual met their demise in 1990 due to injuries sustained in the Wahine wreck. The incident not only claimed lives but also became a pivotal moment for New Zealand's television news broadcasting, marking its maturation. Gripping images of the disaster were transmitted directly into the nation's living rooms, capturing the attention of viewers. This footage, later broadcast worldwide, thrust Wellington into the international media spotlight. There is controversy surrounding the disaster as the ship sailed into hurricane-like conditions on the difficult entrance to Wellington Harbour Reef. In these treacherous conditions that would ultimately seal its tragic destiny as it ran aground on Barrett Reef. The controversy surrounding the Wahine disaster extends beyond the realm of maritime misfortune. Prior to the vessel's launch, the Maori people, indigenous to New Zealand, had issued a foreboding warning about the choice of the ship's name. Wahine in Maori translates to woman or wife, and the Maori community expressed concerns that such a name could bring bad luck and misfortune. Their cautionary sentiments were rooted in cultural beliefs that attached great significance to the power of names. According to Maori tradition, the choice of a name can influence the destiny and well-being of an individual or, in this case, a vessel. The skepticism expressed by the Maori community added an air of mystique to the Wahine's journey, as some perceived it as a warning and heeded. Shipwrecks were commonplace in the 19th century, but this was the 1960s. People could not conceive how this large, modern vessel founded within sight of New Zealand's capital city. The Union Steamship Company's 8,948-ton roll-on roll-off type passenger ferry Wahine was the largest ship of its kind in the world when completed 2 years earlier. It left Port Lyttelton at 8:40 p.m. on the evening of the 9th of April for an overnight voyage. There were 734 passengers and crew on board. Storm warnings had been issued, but rough seas were nothing new in Cook Strait. As it turned out, the Wahine was about to sail into one of the worst storms ever recorded in New Zealand. The ship reached Cook Strait as tropical cyclone Giselle swept south and collided with a southerly front. The combination of warm tropical air and cold air dragged up from Antarctica produced exceptionally violent turbulence. At 5:50 a.m. on the morning of the 10th of April, Captain H.G. Robertson decided to enter Wellington Harbour. The wind was blowing at over 50 knots, but vessels had entered the harbour in stronger winds before. Just as the Wahine reached the narrow funnel of the harbour entrance, however, the wind speed suddenly increased to over 100 knots. Shortly after 6 a.m. the Wahine's radar system failed and a massive wave slammed into the ship, throwing many of those on board off their feet. This left the vessel's side onto the towering waves. The vessel was pushed towards the notorious Barrett Reef on the western side of the harbour entrance. For the next 30 minutes the captain fought against the waves, as Robertson apparently attempted to turn his ship back out to sea in poor visibility. At about 6:35 a.m., Captain Robertson became unaware of his location and ordered full astern. At 6:40 a.m. it was disaster as the vessel reversed onto Barrett Reef. The starboard propeller was smashed off, and the port engine stopped soon after. Initially, many of the passengers were unaware of the gravity of their situation. Due to the ferocious hammering the ship received from the storm, with the ship's engines no longer working, Captain Robertson ordered that all watertight doors be closed and both anchors dropped. Passengers were now informed that the ferry had run aground on the reef. The signal station at nearby Beacon Hill was notified of the accident as the crew prepared life-saving equipment. Flooding in for compartments and on the vehicle deck raised serious concerns about the stability of the ship. The Wahine dragged its anchors and gradually drifted further up the harbour past Point Dorset. Despite being close to shore, tragically the weather made it impossible for rescuers to reach the ship from land. The tug Topui set off from Wellington's Queen's Wharf and reached the Wahine at about 11:00 am. By 11:50 the tug had secured a line to Wahine. An attempt was made to tow the ferry to safety, but the line quickly gave way. Other attempts to get a line to Wahine failed. Shortly after noon the deputy harbourmaster, Captain Galloway, managed to climb aboard the Wahine from the pilot launch, which had also reached the scene. He risked his life jumping from a heavily pitching launch to a ladder hanging over the starboard side of the ship. 1:15 p.m. the Wahine was strongly listing to starboard. Tide and storm had maneuvered the ship around so that there was a small body of water somewhat sheltered from the wind and waves on the lower starboard side. Just before 1:30 p.m. the order was finally given to abandon ship. Captain Robertson had resisted this call because he felt that the storm conditions meant it was safer for the passengers to remain on board. He was also keen to avoid causing any unnecessary panic. Passengers, who had been unaware of just how serious the situation was, were now confused and frightened. People slid across the sloping deck, trying to make their way to the lifeboats. Some of the passengers had removed their life jackets during the morning. Others were initially directed by crew to move to the high port side of the ship, from which it was actually impossible to launch the lifeboats, before making their way to the low side. Only the starboard lifeboats were actually able to be launched, and crew attempted to get as many people as possible onto them. One lifeboat was swamped shortly after leaving the sinking ship, and its occupants were tossed into the sea. Two of the other lifeboats safely reached Seatoun. The third landed at Eastbourne. Other passengers were forced to jump into the freezing, angry sea. Some clung onto inflatable life rafts that had been thrown overboard. But a number of these were punctured by the wreckage or flipped over by the violent wind and seas. At around 2:30 p.m. the now abandoned Wahine fully capsized in 11.6 meters of water just east of Steeple Rock Light and crashed heavily to the seabed. By this time the first of the survivors had already reached the western shore at Seatoun. The Wahine was within sight of land and many other vessels, including the smaller New Zealand Railways Wellington Picton ferry Armona, which stood by to pick up survivors. Many were blown across the harbour towards Eastbourne Beach, an area with very difficult access. Rescue teams found the road to Eastbourne blocked by landslides due to the amount of rain there had now been. Eventually, over several hours, 200 bedraggled survivors emerged through the surf and were assisted to the safety of the shoreline. And fortunately, most of the 51 fatalities occurred here. A number of people who reached shore alive did not receive medical attention quickly enough to prevent death from exposure. Others were drowned or killed when thrown against rocks. Loyal to their posts, Robertson and Galloway were the last to abandon ship after checking that no one remained on the ferry. They spent an hour in the water near the wreck before being rescued. Although the stricken Wahine was close to New Zealand's capital city, the rescue effort was delayed by several hours due to uncertainty over the ship's fate. Those on shore were only just beginning to realize the gravity of the situation. Emergency services were already fully stretched, dealing with numerous other emergency call-outs as the storm tore roofs off houses, toppled trees, and caused injuries as people were hit by flying debris. Because of slips blocking roads, only 8 police officers were initially able to get to Eastbourne. Eventually, another 100 officers and 150 civilians were involved in the rescue effort there. This was an appallingly difficult task in atrocious weather, and commendably so many worked through the night to assist survivors. In all, 371 police members out of a total of 629 in the Wellington district. National headquarters and the training school were involved. Chief Inspector George Twentyman of Police National Headquarters took charge of coordinating the rescue at 2:05 p.m. He had observed first-hand experience in other disasters regarding confusion and stress created by handling inquiries in the same place as the rescue effort. He therefore immediately set up separate groups in different locations to handle the various aspects of the operation and allow the rescue effort to go forward unimpeded. Separate points in the Wellington area were established to deal with inquiries about the passengers and crew, while a survivor assembly station was set up at Wellington Railway Station. A mortuary and property section was also established. A quick mobilization of local authority, military and civilian volunteer assistance was now possible due to a national response organization having been set up in 1968. The Wellington Harbour Master controlled the sea rescue police diving squad. This was one of the first high-profile police diving missions, and the divers provided vital evidence at the court of inquiry. Until the Wahine's sinking, this squad had existed as a group of voluntary enthusiasts from around the Wellington and Hutt districts. Some of these members performed a dangerous dive on the Wahine wreck to recover the radio log from the bridge. Court of Inquiry Chief Inspector George Twentyman, who was in charge of the police response to the Wahine tragedy, realized that a court of inquiry would naturally follow. He therefore ensured that a comprehensive and accurate paper trail existed. Every decision and communication was documented, and these records, together with the personal reports of the officers commanding sections, formed the basis for a very full debriefing report on the police organization during the disaster. This was a first as far as New Zealand police procedure was concerned and is nowadays standard practice. The Court of Inquiry that met 10 weeks after the sinking pinpointed the buildup of water in the vehicle deck as the reason the ferry finally capsized. The ship's enormous two-tiered vehicle deck could hold over 200 cars and spanned nearly the entire length and breadth of the ship. When water entered the vehicle deck, it sloshed from one side of the ship to the other. This momentum increased the vessel's list to starboard until it reached a critical point, forcing the captain to order those on board to abandon ship. The rush to the lower, starboard lifeboats produced a slight but sudden shift in weight that was sufficient to cause the ship to lose any remaining stability. One question focused on the timing of the decision to abandon ship, but the report of the inquiry concluded that more lives would almost certainly have been lost if this order had been given earlier. The storm was so strong that rescue craft would not have been able to assist any earlier than 12:30 p.m. Captain Robertson was criticized for failing to report to those on shore that the vehicle deck was taking on water and that the ship's draft had increased to 6.7 meters after striking the reef. The extreme nature of the storm, though, was ultimately responsible for the tragic events of that day. The Wahine, a marvel of maritime engineering, departed Lyttelton at 8:40 p.m. on April 9, 1968, with 734 passengers and crew on board. Despite storm warnings, the vessel sailed into the treacherous waters of Cook Strait, where tropical cyclone Giselle collided with a southerly front, creating a violent maelstrom of turbulent air. As the ship dragged its anchors, it gradually drifted further into Wellington Harbour, past Point Dorset, making rescue efforts from land impossible. At 5:50 a.m. on April 10th, Captain H.G. Robertson made the decision to enter Wellington Harbour, facing winds exceeding 100 knots. The Wahine's radar system failed, and a colossal wave struck the vessel, pushing it towards the notorious Barrett Reef. In the ensuing chaos, the ship fought against the waves for 30 minutes as Captain Robertson attempted to navigate in poor visibility. By 6:40 a.m., the Wahine reversed onto Barrett Reef, damaging its propeller and engines. With the ship's engines rendered useless, Captain Robertson ordered watertight doors closed and anchors dropped. The crew informed passengers of the grounding, but concerns about the ship's stability grew as flooding in compartments and on the vehicle deck intensified. The situation reached a critical point when, at about 1:30 p.m., the order to abandon ship was finally given. Captain Robertson had initially resisted abandoning ship, citing storm conditions and the desire to prevent panic. The evacuation, however, became a harrowing ordeal as passengers struggled on the sloping deck. Only for starboard lifeboats could be launched, and some passengers were forced to jump into the cold, churning sea. By 2:30 p.m., the abandoned Wahine capsized in 11.6 meters of water east of Steeple Rocklight, leading to a tragic loss of lives. Despite the vessel being within sight of land and other vessels, the storm's intensity delayed rescue efforts. Emergency services were stretched thin, dealing with the aftermath of the storm. The tug Tapui attempted to tow the Wahine, but the line quickly gave way. Deputy Harbourmaster Captain Galloway, risking his life, climbed aboard the Wahine from a pilot launch. The rescue effort, coordinated by Chief Inspector George Twinneyman, faced challenges due to blocked roads and difficult weather conditions. The police diving squad, in one of its first high-profile missions, played a crucial role in recovering vital evidence from the Wahine wreck. The subsequent court of inquiry, held 10 weeks after the tragedy, pinpointed the buildup of water in the vehicle deck as the cause of the ferry's capsizing. Captain Robertson faced criticism for failing to report the ship's deteriorating condition, but the extreme nature of the storm was ultimately deemed responsible for the tragic events of that day. The Wahine disaster serves as a somber reminder of the unpredictable forces of nature and the delicate balance between human endeavors and the elements. The aftermath of the Wahine disaster was devastating, with lives lost, and a once promising ship now ominously resting half-sunken on its side on Barrett's Reef. In the wake of the tragedy, questions arose including why the captain had decided to pursue the voyage in such conditions, and the cultural significance of the Maori warning and whether it held any influence over the course of events. Though the sinking of the Wahine remains a tragic chapter in New Zealand's maritime history, it also serves as a reminder of the interconnectedness of culture and destiny. The controversy surrounding the Maori warning adds a layer of complexity to the narrative, prompting reflection on the role of cultural beliefs in shaping the course of human endeavors, even those embarked upon with the grandest aspiration. So that concludes our look into the tragic sinking of the Wahine.
Thank you for listening. Please join me next time when we will delve into another episode.